So Kyle, thanks for joining us. I'm really excited about talking with you about what's transpired for you over the last year. I haven't really teed this up for the people who are watching it, but just introduce yourself, kind of fill us in on what was going on with you as you were searching for your job.
Absolutely. So my name is Kyle Williams. I am the marketing director at Safe Ride Technologies. We're an Israeli-based startup company, cybersecurity, vehicle health, a lot of really cool technology, artificial intelligence embedded in the automotive space. Um, I met Andy a little over a year ago. I had been out of work for a few months and I was getting really discouraged. I was really struggling to land a job offer. I, from my perspective, and I know everybody's got a different story, but my story is that I had a rock solid resume. I had a lot of good experience in the automotive industry, but I was finding that although my resume was getting me in the door and I was getting past HR, which I thought was a hurdle. And, looking back in hindsight, I think HR is a very soft gatekeeper. They want to get as many people as they can in the door to try to find the right person. And so here I was going into these interviews thinking, oh, I just nailed it with HR. This is going to be great. And then I'd go in and I'd meet with the hiring manager and, I struggled a little bit. They would ask me unexpected questions. I didn't know how to answer them. I didn't know that it was okay to respond with a question. I always thought that I had to have the right answer, which, as I started talking to Andy and joined his boot camp, I learned so much about everything about it, the approach, but also once you get into that interview, which I was doing successfully, how to respond to those tough questions, what questions I should expect. There's a lot of questions, that people didn't ask 20 years ago. When I first came into the industry, I'd meet with one guy and he'd make a decision. We'd hit it off, and if things went well, he'd make a hiring decision pretty much on the spot, or maybe he'd interview a few more people, but he'd already have in his mind, yeah, I like this Kyle guy. I want to bring him onto my team. But now you go through all of these hurdles, and it's interview after interview, sometimes with groups of people, sometimes with several different individuals, and they've all got these questions that they've gotten from HR. They're really weird questions. They're really not about the job. It's more to try to get some insight into your personality and who you are and how you think. And I'm an engineer. I don't think that way. I think everything's black and white. You ask me a question, I have to give you the right answer. And I found through Andy that there are ways to answer these questions. But even more than that, the whole approach that I was using to find a job was wrong. And that's another thing that I learned from Andy's boot camp. So once I sat down with Andy and went through the boot camp, I realized that the first thing I needed to do was take a step back and ask myself, what kind of a company do I want to work for? Who do I want to work for? What do I want that environment to be like? What is the fit for me? To find that fit for myself, and then identify the companies that I think are the right fit. And then, which was just amazing to me, don't wait for that company to come out with a job description and a job opening, but actually be proactive and reach out. And I started finding people on LinkedIn and I did a lot of research. And in fact, that was the biggest difference in my mindset, was how much research I did before I ever talked to anybody. So I would go in and I would research companies, and I would go into LinkedIn and I would try to find either the right hiring managers or people who could potentially connect me with the right hiring managers. And I didn't even deal with HR at all. Instead, I was reaching out blind to people who I didn't know if they had a job opening or not. And amazingly, it worked out perfectly.
So wait, so let me
Go ahead,
ask you,
Andy.
about that, because that's really, I think that's a big message that I don't think a lot of people get. People, and this is, I'm so glad you said that, because I remember when we met, there were two big things. It was, how do I get more proactive about targeting organizations, and then once I get the interviews, what's the better structure to go about interviewing? But these are two huge hurdles that I think a lot of people have, that a lot of people don't really understand, is that only 20% of job openings are actually publicized. People are, number one, there are openings that are not publicized. Number two, there are hiring officials or bosses. I love the boss hunting technique, which I've been teaching for a long time. That organizations are always looking for great people. Bosses in particular are always looking to improve their teams. And even if they might have an opening that's not yet ready to go or publicized, they might be willing to upgrade their staff. So as you started to do that, so you started to target organizations, get responses, get these interviews. And I know one of the things you shared with me earlier was that one of the bigger challenges then became, how do I make sure I nail the interview just as far as the communication? After you got with me and in the program, and we had a live session, you went through the boot camp program, what were some of the changes that you made or that you'd recommend to people when they're in the interviews? Because like you said, you're a senior guy, you're an engineer, you're smart, you've probably not really looked for jobs throughout your career. You always had a great job or one lined up or somebody recruited you, and so you're going through this for the first time, which is what a lot of people go through, and they're very confused. So what would you say would be the interview tips that you would, or that you recognize you needed to change when you got in the program and we started working together?
Right. So for me personally, the two biggest changes that I needed to make was, first of all, I needed to be prepared for those soft, touchy-feely questions that, again, I'm an engineer and everything's black and white for me. And if you ask me a question that doesn't have a black and white answer, I'm going to want to think about it for a while. I might want to sleep on it overnight and then tell you the answer tomorrow. But you can't do that in a job interview.
Yeah.
So having you prepare me for, provide a list of potential questions and not just what the questions are, but what is it that they're trying to discern from this question about you as the applicant, the potential team member. And just being able to sit down in advance and think about these questions in advance and come up with answers that were true, that made sense to me. We don't want to just give canned answers to these canned questions, right? We want to give answers that are relevant to who we are, but you want them to sound natural too. But at the same time, you want to be prepared for them. And in the past, I was never prepared for those. And then the other thing, and I think I mentioned this already, is that I never realized how important it was to ask questions. When somebody asks you a question, you don't need to respond with the exact right answer. In fact, it's okay to don't know the answer. It's okay to not have the exact experience that they're asking about. One of the things that you taught me is you can ask more questions to try to get a better understanding of what they are really trying to discern from this question. And it's also okay to not have the exact experience that they're asking for, but instead to say, I haven't experienced that yet. However, I've done X, Y, and Z, which is related to what you're asking about, and so on, just to kind of show that you are a good fit, even if you don't have the exact experience that they're asking for.
Wait, this is absolute gold, because this is what I think a lot of people where they lose their confidence, because I'm not really sure. I'm not sure how to answer, or I don't have the experience. I'm afraid to say I don't. So wait, you said three really big things that I hope people didn't just roll over. Is that you weren't sure about these the touchy-feely questions, and we all know what those are, right? We all understand that, but understanding it's not what's being asked, but ultimately what the employer is looking for. And when you know that and you understand the reasoning or the rationale behind the question, it's much easier to package your response and be truthful. So that was great point number one. Number two, and I want to make sure that everybody watching this recognizes when you say it's okay to ask questions, we're not just talking about the employer saying to you, oh, hey, Kyle, what questions do you have for me? And then you basically are handed the microphone. You're talking about asking clarifying questions when you want to make absolutely certain you understand what they're looking for or why they're looking for it, or why it's important to them. You're not answering a question with a question because you're not completely deflecting. You're actually asking for clarification so you can give the smartest answer. So people need to know that they can do that. But then the other thing is, don't freak out when they're asking you something that you don't have exactly, because
Yeah.
number one, they probably know that to begin with, that if they saw your resume, they looked at that, they probably should know that you don't have that. And if you are completely cold with it, if you're interviewing, you likely are still okay, because if that was that big a deal that you didn't have the exact experience, they probably wouldn't even bother to talk to you. So what you really need to do is, right, we talked about highlighting what it is that you do know, talk about what you are, not what you're not. Okay, wait, those are 3 home run points, my friend, and those are good. You want to add one?
Yeah, because you just brought up a good point that just brought something else to my mind that I wasn't doing correctly in the past, which is the other part of asking questions. So there's a part in the interview where the employer says to you, do you have any questions? And in the past, I might jot down a few things, but man, I'll tell you what, after going through your boot camp, I went into every interview with a list of questions, and I would have a list for each person that I knew that I was going to interview with in advance.
Awesome.
That was, some of them overlapped, but they were tailored for that specific person, and they covered a range of different topics. And anyone who goes through the boot camp will learn more about these types of questions that you should be asking. And another thing that I realized too is, let me back up a second and tell you about an experience that I had a few months before I did the boot camp, which I wasn't out of work yet. I knew that I was going to be losing my job, but I wasn't out of work yet. And I had this opportunity to interview with a hiring manager. It was actually going to be a promotion for me. And the guy took me off guard. The first thing he said to me when I got on the phone with him is, do you have any questions for me? Like, I was so confused. It really confused me, because I was used to this certain pattern, we're going to interview you, and then at the end, you might have some questions. And if I been prepared with the questions the way I was a few months later after going through your boot camp, I would have totally gotten that job. I know in my mind, I've got so much confidence from your boot camp, and I don't want to sound arrogant, but I've got so much more confidence knowing how to approach the whole interviewing process. The other thing that I learned about the interviewing process, and I had kind of had this whole thing backwards, or only half the picture. I would go into an interview before trying to sell myself, trying to show that I was the perfect fit for this role that they had. When what I should have been doing is I should have been going in, asking questions to see, is this job really the right fit for me? Because that's what they're doing. They're trying to find out if you're the right fit for this company, for this position, for this team. And you need to learn the same thing. You need to understand, am I gonna enjoy working in this team? Is this the right fit for me? Is it the right culture? Is it the right role? And you shouldn't go into a job interview just trying to get an offer, because that's what I was doing at every interview. And that's another purpose of the questions too. They're not just to show them that you're prepared, but really to help yourself decide if this is a job that I really want.
Wait, that's such a great, I think that might be one of the biggest transformations that I see with people that I work with, is that, because people don't come to me because everything is great. They come to me because they're in pain of some sort. There's a challenge that they have, and likely have tried to solve it on their own, but it's very confusing. And what I always tell people is, I want you to find me after you've tried some things on your own, because then you will appreciate then you'll be able to diagnose quickly what wasn't working when you start to see that. But that was so great. But I love the evolution that you went through. And I always tell people that everything they go through in their job search, it's like a black box. You go in, it's a black box. It's all one search. And when you say, hey, if I'd have been ready for that, I would have gotten that job. And I always say to people, that was like a pawn being moved off the chessboard. That had to happen so that when you got to the right place at the right time with the right organization, you had accumulated all that experience that you then channeled into that victory. And speaking of victories, okay, so you were struggling, you find me, you get in the program, we do some work together. For the folks watching, what then transpired in the way of this employment that you got, or these offers that you got?
So then I started, like I said, going through LinkedIn. Well, first of all, deciding what exactly it was that I wanted, what company I wanted to work for, what kind of a role, who I wanted my boss to potentially be, and trying to find those types of bosses on LinkedIn, and also through networking. But I was doing a lot of cold calling through LinkedIn, reaching out to people. And I had a lot of success with that. I had so one of the things that happens when you take this approach is that hiring managers typically have a lot of needs. And they may have some job descriptions written, they may have some ideas in their head, but you come to them and you start having these discussions with them, and they start thinking about, okay, how can this person fit into my organization? And it's not necessarily related to any specific job description that's already posted or anything that they've already discussed with HR. Maybe it's just they're thinking about their needs and how they can offload some of the things that they're doing to someone who will report to them. And now I've forgotten what your question was, Andy.
But ultimately the question was, as you went through this tactic, you received some offers because of this route that you took. And so that was right. That was the I guess.
So I found myself getting much deeper into the interview process. So I was getting, HR was kind of being included only as a courtesy so that they could schedule the meetings. But it was the hiring managers who were bringing me in for discussions, and they were connecting me with the people on their teams, and they were thinking about how I could fit into their organization. Now, I ultimately wound up with 2 offers. I'm confident that I would have had more had I waited under normal circumstances. But I did start this job at the beginning of March 2020. So I'm actually very fortunate that I accepted a job offer when I did, because then COVID hit and things kind of slowed down. But I had 2 job offers when I accepted this one. The job that I have now, this marketing director at SafeRide Technologies role, when I first started having discussions with a friend of mine who actually was working at this company at SafeRide Technologies, this not only was this job not posted yet, but there was no job description. They didn't really even realize if they wanted to hire a marketing director or not. They had someone doing the marketing director role. They weren't really happy with them, but they weren't at the point where they were ready to hire anybody. So I got in the door, and I was basically, the primary guy. And it's funny too, my boss now, I think when he was looking to fill this role originally, he was looking for someone with a marketing background. And I've got an engineering background. I'm really not a marketing guy, but he brought me in just because it was a good fit, and I could bring more to the organization than just a typical marketing director would bring.
Yeah, I think this is the big thing for people, is that you were open to this because you drafted your requirements, you knew the things that you enjoyed, and a big part of that was getting into an organization where you could thrive. And I think kind of one of the final messages to people is, don't be so fixated on the role. Be open to joining a great organization and then getting in and proving yourself. And if you do have that, I always call it the art of the possible, where, hey, what can this be? Is this the right environment for me to thrive in? If it is, get in and prove yourself. And that's what you did. So you go from struggling to figuring out how to target people, to overcoming the hurdles in the interviews, to getting multiple offers, to accepting one, and then expanding your role, which is just a huge success story. So before we wrap this up, final thoughts here for you to the folks watching. What would you like to say to them? What would you, if assuming they are you, a year ago, right? Like,
yes.
What would you have said to your, 10-month-old self before you went through this process, or whatever it is? What would be those home run points you'd love to leave them with?
So I think the biggest thing is to not try to go it alone, to try to get some help. And, I'm a big Andy fan, so I would recommend Andy. But I mean, if you've got other avenues, other people that you would want to work with, that's fine. But, I tend to, I don't know if it's because I'm an engineer or I'm a guy or what it is, I try to solve all my problems by myself. And we have blinders, we don't see our weaknesses the way that other people can, and especially a professional like Andy, who can bring in all his years of experience and show you really the tools and techniques that you need to succeed in finding a job. When I first started interviewing, I thought that finding a job would be a part-time, 10 or 20 hour a week job. But the preparation that you need to do and the research and the proactivity. I mean, I worked harder trying to find a job than definitely than a 40-hour work week.
Oh man, that is, I will tell you this. I tell people, if you are, for those that are out of work, because everybody's situation is different, right? Some are unemployed, some are in jobs they don't love, some are just trying to make career changes and things of that nature. Getting a job will be harder to do. It's really hard. It's really lonely. And it should be your full-time job when you're out of work. But I think the message that you're leaving these people with, in addition to all those great messages you gave, through our discussion here, is that people do not realize how important having a community is. Wait, it's one thing to have me to help you, but all the other people.
Oh, yeah.
Think about everything you just taught. Anybody who listened to our exchange here and all those pointers that you gave them. So for everybody who's listening out there, from me and Kyle,
Absolutely.
the
And I
community
think about
is a big deal.
I think about the guy in your community who taught us about LinkedIn X-Ray. I mean, that was so beneficial for me to be able to, because for anybody who starts trying to find people on LinkedIn, you will find out within a few days that LinkedIn is going to cut off your supply of searches.
Right.
And they're going to very much limit your ability to make contacts.
Yeah.
And Andy met a guy who was able to show us a way to use Google search to find LinkedIn contacts, and it was absolutely awesome.
One of our, what he's referring to, Charles, one of our people in our job search coaching program who did a demo for all the people in the job search boot camp. And it was a hit, and Kara's pretty good with it too, but it was really nice. Actually, we try to do what we can to involve the folks to help each other. But Kyle, I want to wrap this up with a huge thank you to you. I cannot thank you enough. It's been great to meet you. It's been great to help you, and it's been great to stay connected with you, through your development. And thanks again for taking the time out to do this. I hope everybody gives you a big shout out. Hey, maybe all you guys want to get connected with Kyle out there. But
well, thank you, Andy. It's been a pleasure, and I can't wait until we get beyond COVID and maybe we can get together for a beer or something.
You got that right, buddy. All right, thanks a million. Really appreciate it.